He gave up everything: his passion, his dream job, and even his personal time. A year later, he was promoted to the top position. But was it just fate, or did the sacrifice hold the secret? We've all heard stories about people who seem to stumble into success. Maybe it feels like they got lucky, or they were in the right place at the right time. But what if success isn't as random as we think? What if it's actually the result of something we might not expect? Something like giving up what we hold most dear. Take this man, for example. He wasn't a workaholic, nor was he someone who had everything handed to him. He worked hard, like many of us do, but one day, he made the ultimate decision. He gave it all up. His career, the very thing he had been working towards for years, was suddenly on the chopping block. But little did he know, that decision would lead him to the biggest promotion of his life. So what happened? Was it sheer coincidence that this promotion came after he made that bold choice? Or was there something deeper at play here? Stick with me as I share the story that might just change the way you view success, sacrifice, and how the two might be more connected than you think. It wasn't an easy choice, and many would have said he was crazy. To some, it seemed like the kind of decision that could end a career, one that was going places, one that most people would envy. But for him, it had become clear that there was no way forward without this drastic step. He had spent years building his career, working tirelessly, and pushing through long hours, late nights, and endless meetings. But somewhere along the way, the passion that had once fueled him began to fade. The job that once felt like a dream had started to feel like a cage. At first, it was subtle. He didn't notice the changes right away. He'd wake up early, as usual, but the excitement that came with tackling a new day just wasn't there. Mornings felt more like a grind than a fresh start. As weeks turned into months, his motivation started to fade. There was a constant sense of being drained, not just physically, but mentally. Every day seemed to blend together. And before long, he started questioning everything. Was this the life he wanted? Was this the legacy he wanted to build? He started asking himself some tough questions. Why am I doing this? What's it all for? Every success felt more hollow than the last. He was climbing up the ladder, but was he climbing toward a goal that truly mattered to him anymore? For the first time, he had the unsettling thought that maybe he was just chasing a version of success that society told him was important, rather than the one that would make him truly happy. The stress was unbearable. He started to feel like he was losing control over his own life. Everything was about the next deadline, the next task, the next project. He had no time for himself, for his family, or even for things he loved doing outside of work. The work-life balance he had always talked about seemed like a distant dream, one that he couldn't seem to grasp, no matter how hard he tried. The more he gave, the more was expected from him, and it never seemed to stop. One night, after yet another long day of back-to-back meetings, he sat in his office, staring at the wall. The weight of the decision he was about to make settled in his chest like a heavy stone. Was he really ready for this? He had worked his entire adult life to get to where he was. To walk away from it all felt like giving up, even though deep down, he knew it wasn't. He thought about his family and the security his job provided. He thought about the people who had invested in him, the mentors, the colleagues, the friends who had cheered him on. Was he being selfish? Was this a mistake? The internal battle raged. How could he walk away from something he had worked so hard to build? How could he leave behind the financial stability, the position that others would kill for? But then as he sat there in the quiet of his office, something clicked. He thought about the last few years, the missed family events, the times he had to cancel plans because work demanded his attention, the way his personal life had begun to feel more like a distant memory than a part of his reality. His dreams of building a future were being replaced by endless tasks, projects, and a growing sense of emptiness. He realized that he was no longer in control. His job, which had once been a passion, had now become a force that controlled his life, and that wasn't the kind of life he wanted anymore. That night, he made the decision to let go. It wasn't something he had planned to do. In fact, he had spent so many months telling himself that this was just a phase, that things would get better, that he just needed to push through. But the more he tried, the less he could convince himself that staying was the right choice. He knew that if he didn't take action now, he would wake up one day and realize that his life had passed him by. So he walked into his boss's office the next morning and made the announcement. It wasn't dramatic, It wasn't a resignation that came with anger or frustration. It was quiet, almost peaceful. He simply explained that he needed to step away for a while to reevaluate, to focus on himself, and to find out if there was more to life than this career. His boss, who had always respected his dedication, seemed taken aback, but didn't protest. He understood. After all, this wasn't just a decision about leaving a job, it was about taking control of his life again. Walking away wasn't as simple as it seemed. There were mixed feelings, doubts, and the inevitable fear of what would come next. What if he couldn't find anything else that was as good? What if he made a huge mistake? His mind raced with endless what-ifs that plagued his every waking hour. The next few weeks were a blur. At first there was relief. He could finally breathe. For the first time in years, he wasn't answering to anyone. He wasn't bound by deadlines, meetings, or endless to-do lists. He had time to think, to reflect, and most importantly, to rediscover who he really was outside of the persona he had created at work. But soon, that relief started to wear off. The reality of being without a job, of not knowing what was coming next, began to set in. There were moments when he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. He felt the sting of losing his sense of purpose, the lack of structure in his day-to-day life. Without the job, without the constant pressure, who was he? He found himself wandering through the city, thinking about what his next move could be. He felt disconnected from everything he once held important. But with that disconnection came the opportunity for something new. He had given himself space. He had stepped out of the machine and into the unknown, and for the first time in a long time, he had the freedom to decide what came next. It wasn't easy, it wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't how he had envisioned his career going. But as the weeks went by, he started to realize that this decision wasn't just about leaving a job. It was about something far deeper, about letting go of a life that no longer served him in order to make space for something better. The decision wasn't just a sacrifice, it was an opportunity for reinvention. And little did he know, that decision to step away, to sacrifice the familiar, would lead him down a path he never saw coming, a path that would ultimately change his life forever. But what happened next wasn't easy at all. In fact, the next few weeks felt like an emotional roller coaster. What he thought would be a period of relief turned into something completely different. When you've spent your entire life chasing after goals, deadlines, and expectations, stepping away from it all can be overwhelming. The absence of structure, of purpose, it was like a void. And that void wasn't filled with the excitement of freedom, but with the harsh reality of how much he had lost in the process. At first, there was relief. He could sleep in. He didn't have to answer to anyone. No more emails, no more meetings, no more endless lists of things to do. It was what he had dreamed of for years, right? The escape from the grind, the chance to finally have time for himself. But as the days went by, that feeling of relief started to wear off, replaced by something he hadn't expected: boredom. No, not just boredom, disorientation. He felt adrift. The absence of the career that had defined him for so long left him questioning who he really was. Without the job, there was no reason to get up in the morning. No schedule, no deadlines. There were no longer any external markers of success. He had always defined himself by his work, by the projects he completed, the titles he earned, the acknowledgement he received from his peers. But now, with all of that gone, he was left with just himself. And honestly, he didn't know what to do with that. The first few weeks were filled with uncertainty. He spent his time walking around the house, picking up old hobbies he hadn't touched in years. Things like reading, drawing, and playing guitar, but it never felt fulfilling. There was always a nagging feeling in the back of his mind that something was missing. Sure, he was no longer bound by the constant pressure of the corporate world, but he felt disconnected, like he was walking through life in a fog. One morning, while sipping coffee on his porch, he had an uncomfortable realization. Was this all he was capable of now? Was this really the new chapter of his life? The familiar anxiety crept back in. He started second-guessing himself. Had he made a mistake? Was it too soon to leave? What was he even supposed to be doing now? He began to feel as though his entire identity had been tied up in that job. Without it, he wasn't sure where he belonged or what his purpose was. He wasn't ready to just sit back and relax. He was someone who thrived on ambition, on working towards something. Yet now that he had the time to focus on himself, it didn't feel like the victory he had imagined. Instead, it felt like a slow, gnawing emptiness. A couple of weeks into his new routine, he realized something even more troubling. He had become isolated. Without the daily interactions with coworkers, the conversations that had once been a natural part of his day, he felt himself drifting further and further from the world around him. Sure, he talked to friends and family, but those conversations weren't the same. He wasn't sharing the same common ground anymore. What could he say? Hey, I'm not working anymore, just figuring things out? It didn't feel like enough. And every time someone asked him how he was doing, it was like the weight of that question hung in the air, waiting for him to come up with an answer that was more than just a polite, "I'm doing fine." It wasn't just his social life that was suffering. There was also the matter of his mental health. With every passing day, the feelings of self-doubt became more pronounced. He was starting to question whether he was cut out for this new life. He had always been confident, driven. Yet here he was, paralyzed by the very freedom he had longed for. He had given up his job, his career, and everything that came with it, but now he didn't know what to do with the space that had opened up. The days were long, and every time he looked at the clock, he couldn't help but feel like time was slipping away, wasted. Every morning felt like the beginning of a journey into the unknown, and every evening felt like a dead end. He had no direction, and while he was relieved not to be in the workplace anymore, he was now confronted with the equally unsettling idea that he didn't know what came next. This internal struggle was the hardest part. His thoughts would loop in circles. Maybe I've made a mistake. What if I'm just running away? Maybe I should go back, try again, put in one more year. Yet even as these thoughts haunted him, he knew deep down that he couldn't go back to the way things were. The person who had been stuck in the hamster wheel, running from one task to the next, without stopping to think about what he actually wanted, couldn't be the same person who was now standing at a crossroads. He had made this choice for a reason, but why was it so hard to face the consequences? He started to compare himself to others who had stayed on the path, continuing to climb the corporate ladder. They were moving forward, getting promotions, earning more money, gaining recognition, while he, on the other hand, seemed stuck in the middle of a self-imposed exile. It felt as though everyone else was moving ahead while he was just standing still. The pressure to figure things out loomed over him. It wasn't just the pressure from society or from his peers. It was the pressure he was placing on himself. He was his own harshest critic. Everyone kept telling him that it was okay to take time for himself, that he had done the right thing by stepping away. But the doubts, the questions, and the fear of making a mistake refused to go away. It took a while before he realized something important. This phase of uncertainty, of struggling to find his way, was part of the journey. It wasn't going to be smooth. It wasn't going to be immediate. But it was necessary. He needed this time to rediscover himself, to let go of the old identity he had built for himself in the workplace, and to learn how to define success on his own terms. As time passed, he started to embrace the discomfort. Rather than fighting the uncertainty, he began to lean into it. He gave himself permission to not have all the answers. Slowly, he started to find peace in the stillness, and that's when something unexpected happened. The more he leaned into the struggle, the more he began to rediscover his passions, his hobbies, and his interests outside of work. The slow progress was frustrating, but it was progress nonetheless, and as weeks turned into months, he began to realize that this struggle, this journey through doubt and discomfort, was what would ultimately lead him to a better place, a place where he could truly thrive, free from the constraints of the old life he had left behind. But getting there wasn't easy. The road was filled with challenges, but it was these challenges that were beginning to shape him into someone new. And what he didn't know at the time was that this transformation, this period of struggle, was preparing him for something bigger than he had ever imagined. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. While he had initially struggled with uncertainty and the overwhelming quiet of his life, something remarkable started happening beneath the surface. The benefits of giving up the life he had known didn't show up immediately. No, they came gradually, quietly, and in ways he didn't anticipate. He had expected freedom to feel like an instant relief, a weight lifted off his shoulders. But what he didn't expect was that giving up his career would lead to a deeper, more personal kind of growth. As he navigated this period of uncertainty, he started noticing small changes. It wasn't just about having time to do things he had always wanted to do. It was more profound than that. The absence of his demanding job and the constant hustle allowed him the space to rediscover parts of himself that had been buried for years. The time he once spent answering emails or attending meetings was now filled with quiet reflection, walks in the park and reading books that had always been on his to-read list, but were constantly pushed aside for more important things. He started to feel lighter, not because he wasn't working, but because he was finally reconnecting with himself. What surprised him the most was how much his physical and mental health improved. He had never realized how much stress had taken a toll on his body until it was no longer a constant companion. The tension that used to reside in his shoulders and neck began to dissipate. His sleep, which had always been restless, became deeper and more restful. He began waking up feeling more refreshed, not because he was sleeping longer, but because his mind wasn't racing the moment he opened his eyes. He started taking walks, something he had never had time for before. At first, it was just to clear his head, but soon those walks became an essential part of his day, a time to think, to breathe, and to let go of the weight of his old life. He had time to focus on himself in ways that he hadn't in years. It wasn't just his physical well-being that was improving, his mental health began to stabilize too. The constant pressure of meeting deadlines, performing and delivering, had kept him in a state of chronic stress for so long that he hadn't realized how much of his emotional energy had been consumed by anxiety and fear of failure. Now that he wasn't under the constant scrutiny of his job, he could start processing those emotions and learning how to manage them in healthier ways. He found himself feeling less irritable, more patient, and more present in his everyday interactions. He was becoming, for the first time in years, someone who wasn't always on edge, worried about the next crisis or problem to solve. One of the most unexpected changes came in the form of creativity. Without the constraints of work, he began to think more creatively, not just in his career but in his life as a whole. The mental clutter that had clouded his thoughts for so long started to clear. His ideas flowed more freely, and he found himself coming up with solutions to old problems that had seemed insurmountable just a few months ago. He was approaching challenges with a fresh focus, unburdened by the stress and urgency of his old job. For the first time, he could approach life as a whole, rather than viewing it through the narrow lens of his work responsibilities. This newfound creativity also led him to explore new opportunities. He had always been passionate about photography, a hobby he had put on the back burner while pursuing his career. Now, with the time to dedicate to it, he started taking photography classes and exploring different techniques. He went on weekend trips to scenic locations, capturing images that he never would have had time to notice before. He rediscovered the joy of being present in the moment, of truly seeing the world around him, without the distractions of his former life. His creativity wasn't limited to photography, though. It began to spill over into other aspects of his life. His personal relationships, his approach to problem solving, even his home decor. But perhaps the most profound benefit of all was the shift in his mindset. The constant pressure to succeed and climb the ladder had clouded his understanding of what true success really was. Before, success had been defined by titles, accolades, and the approval of others. But now, he was beginning to realize that success wasn't about what others thought of him or what he had achieved in his career. It was about how he felt about his life, about his own well-being, and about the balance he had found between work, personal growth, and happiness. He was learning that success could be quiet, personal, and internal. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about feeling fulfilled and at peace with where he was in life. This shift in perspective also led him to reconnect with people in a more meaningful way. He had always been so consumed with work that his personal relationships had taken a back seat. But now, with more time and mental space, he was able to focus on his family and friends in a way that felt genuine and fulfilling. He reached out to old friends he had lost touch with, not because he felt obligated, but because he truly wanted to reconnect. He spent more time with his children, engaging with them in ways he hadn't before. The relationships that had once felt strained by his busy work schedule began to flourish again, as he became more present in his interactions. The beauty of this time away from work was that it gave him the space to reevaluate his values. He started thinking about what truly mattered in life: health, relationships, happiness, and how those things could be nurtured, even without the stability of a traditional career. It wasn't that he was opposed to working again, but he began to see that his career didn't have to define him. He could be successful in many ways, not just through a job or a title. His life was richer now, more balanced, and more fulfilling than it had ever been before. He also realized that stepping away from work had given him the clarity he needed to make better decisions moving forward. Before, he had been so focused on surviving the grind that he never had the opportunity to reflect on what he truly wanted. Now, with time to think, he could consider his future with intention. What kind of work did he want to do? What kind of life did he want to build for himself? And more importantly, what kind of person did he want to become? Looking back, he could see that this period of struggle, of feeling lost and uncertain, had actually been the foundation of something better. He had gained a deeper understanding of who he was and what truly mattered. The time away from the corporate world had allowed him to rediscover himself, to nurture his health, his relationships, and his passions. And in the end, it was this personal growth, this transformation, that would ultimately set him up for the next chapter of his life, the one he had been waiting for all along. And then it happened. Out of nowhere, a position opened up at the company, one that had never been available before. He hadn't even been looking for a new role. He wasn't actively searching for any opportunity, but the perfect storm of circumstances had come together in a way that he couldn't have predicted. His time away from the grind, his renewed sense of self, his personal growth. These were all the pieces of the puzzle that led him to the promotion that would change everything. The moment he had let go, not of just his career but of the pressure that had been weighing him down for years, was the moment his life took a turn he never saw coming. He was just starting to settle into his new rhythm, figuring out who he was outside of his old job, when the phone call came. He remembered the day vividly. It was a Wednesday afternoon. He was sitting in his favorite chair, the one that had taken up residence in his home office, a chair that had become a symbol of his new life. He was sipping his tea when his old boss called. It had been months since they had spoken, and to be honest, he hadn't expected to hear from him again. But there it was, the name popping up on the screen of his phone. "Hey, it's Dan. I know it's been a while," his old boss said, his tone friendly, but with an undercurrent of something more serious. "Listen, we've got an opening here. A big one, and I've been thinking a lot about you. Are you interested in coming back?" At first he didn't know how to respond. Was he hearing this correctly? He had just walked away from the company, only a few months ago. He had been feeling lost, uncertain, and now here was his former boss, asking him to return. The offer was unexpected, but there was something in the way Dan spoke that made him listen closely. "What's the role?" he asked, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Well, the position is new, sort of a leadership role, overseeing several departments. It's something we've needed for a while, but we've been waiting for the right person to take it on. And honestly, I can't think of anyone better for the job than you." The words took a moment to sink in. The person who had just walked away from it all, the person who had been questioning his worth and his purpose, was now being offered a leadership position, a role that would elevate him to the very top of the company. It didn't make sense. How could this be happening? He wasn't even actively looking for a job anymore. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. This promotion, this opportunity, wasn't about luck or timing. It was about the transformation he had undergone in the time since he walked away. During his break, he had grown in ways he never could have anticipated. It wasn't just about stepping away from work. It was about the work he had done on himself. He was in a place now where he was ready for a role that demanded more than just a title or a paycheck. He was ready for a position that required leadership, vision, and a new kind of balance between work and life. He had always been driven by external validation, by the pressure of success, but now, with the lessons he had learned, he was ready to lead differently. The person he had become during his time away from the grind was not the same person who had left the job. He was more grounded, more confident, and perhaps most importantly, he was more balanced. He had shed the layers of stress and anxiety that had defined his work life and replaced them with a sense of clarity and purpose. When he accepted the role, it wasn't just a professional achievement, it was the culmination of everything he had been through during his time away. The promotion wasn't a reward for merely stepping back into his old shoes. It was a testament to how far he had come as a person. He was no longer someone who defined himself solely by his career. He was someone who understood that success wasn't just about titles or the job you held. It was about living in alignment with your values and finding fulfillment in all aspects of your life. Returning to work was a huge adjustment. It wasn't like flipping a switch and suddenly everything was as it had been. He wasn't the same person anymore, and he quickly realized that the role was going to require a different approach. The weight of the leadership position felt both exhilarating and intimidating. He was now responsible for overseeing teams, making high-stakes decisions, and guiding the direction of the company. But unlike before, when he had felt overwhelmed by the pressure, this time he approached his responsibilities with a calm confidence. He began to lead with empathy, understanding the importance of balancing productivity with mental and emotional well-being, something he hadn't fully grasped before his time away. He encouraged his team to take breaks, to prioritize their health, and to find joy in their work, something that had always been missing in his own career before. He didn't want his team to burn out like he had. He wanted to create an environment where people could thrive, not just survive. The first few months were a blur. He was stepping into a completely new role, learning new things, and navigating relationships with people who had once been his colleagues, but were now his direct reports. There were challenges, of course. Not everyone was on board with his new approach to leadership. Some people were skeptical. After all, he had left the company. They wondered if he had the stamina to keep up with the demands of the role, or if he was just a temporary fix. But slowly, through patience and persistence, he began to win them over. He didn't try to be the old him, the high-energy, no-nonsense leader who demanded results. Instead, he focused on building trust, on creating a culture where people felt seen, heard, and valued. And surprisingly, it worked. The company's culture started to shift, and productivity skyrocketed. People were happier, more engaged, and the atmosphere in the office was more positive than it had been in years. The promotion, as it turned out, wasn't just about him climbing back up the corporate ladder. It was about him using the lessons he had learned during his time away to create a work environment that was more sustainable, more fulfilling, and more human. He had been given the chance to rebuild not only his career but also the very foundation of the company. And in doing so, he realized that this wasn't just a career milestone. It was a testament to the power of personal growth, the power of knowing when to step away and when to step back in. Looking back, he understood that the promotion hadn't been a coincidence. It was a result of the work he had done on himself, the sacrifices he had made, the time he had taken to reflect, and the decisions he had made to prioritize his well-being. The promotion wasn't just a new job, it was a new way of living, a new way of leading, and a new way of defining success. In the end, he realized that the real reward wasn't the title, the paycheck, or the recognition. The real reward was the transformation he had gone through. And that, in itself, was more valuable than anything else. So, was it a coincidence? Or was there something more to this whole situation? It's a question that haunted him as he looked back on everything that had led him to this point. The promotion, the sudden opportunity, the unexpected shift in his life. It all seemed too perfectly timed, too aligned with his growth, for it to have been mere luck. He started to realize that the pieces of the puzzle were coming together in a way that was anything but random. Before he took that step away from the job, he had been someone who defined himself by his position. His work was his life. His identity was closely tied to the title on his business card, to the recognition he received from colleagues and superiors, and to the pressure of always being on. He had been driven by external validation and a constant need to prove himself, thinking that success was something that could only be earned through hard work, hours of sacrifice, and relentless ambition. He never once considered what would happen if he stopped chasing it, if he simply took a step back and allowed himself to breathe. But after stepping away, something incredible happened. He found that by taking a break from the grind, by removing the constant pressure from his life, he was able to reconnect with himself. The time away wasn't about giving up. It was about rediscovering his core values, his passions, and his sense of purpose. He learned that success wasn't just about achieving milestones or getting promotions. It was about balance, about mental and emotional health, and about staying true to what truly mattered to him. As he thought more about the promotion, he couldn't help but wonder if it was the personal transformation he had gone through that had prepared him for this moment. The growth he had experienced, mentally, emotionally, and even physically, had made him someone who was now equipped to handle this leadership role in a way he never could have before. He had the clarity to see things from a fresh perspective, to lead with empathy and understanding, and to value the well-being of those around him. His previous mindset, which had been entirely focused on results and success at any cost, had been replaced by a more holistic approach to leadership, one that considered the human side of business. This wasn't a coincidence. The opportunity hadn't simply appeared out of nowhere. It was the direct result of his decision to prioritize his well-being and take the time he needed to grow. When he left, he didn't know what the future would hold, but he had unknowingly made space for new opportunities. By letting go of the constant pursuit of external validation, he allowed himself to become someone who was capable of more than just doing the work. He was now someone who could lead with purpose and vision. The question that had been on his mind for so long, the one about whether stepping away had been the right choice, was finally answered. It wasn't just a decision to leave a job, it was a decision to invest in his future, in a way that would allow him to be more than just a cog in the corporate machine. It was a decision to redefine what success meant for him, and in doing so, he had positioned himself for a role that aligned with those new values. The promotion, then, wasn't a reward for simply returning to his old role. It was a recognition of his transformation, of the way he had evolved into someone capable of leading in a way that was far more impactful than before. Looking back, he couldn't help but see how his time away had been the perfect preparation for this role. He had learned how to manage stress, how to balance work and personal life, and how to truly connect with people on a human level. He had discovered that leadership wasn't just about making decisions or directing teams. It was about understanding, supporting, and guiding others. And now, with the promotion in hand, he was ready to put these lessons into practice. The transformation wasn't just internal. It reflected in the way he interacted with others, the way he approached challenges, and the way he saw his career moving forward. He wasn't just back in the game, he was playing the game differently. He had stepped away, yes, but that step back had given him the room to move forward in a much more meaningful way. The promotion wasn't just about the title or the salary increase. It was about becoming the person he had always been meant to be, but had never been able to access in the rush of work and ambition. And that's when it became clear. The real connection wasn't between the job and the promotion. It was between the personal growth he had undergone and the opportunity that had come his way. The decision to step back, to make space for himself, had unlocked a new kind of success. It wasn't just about doing things. It was about becoming someone who could lead, inspire, and create meaningful change. So no, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a series of decisions, all leading him to a place where he could finally embrace who he truly was and step into the role that had always been waiting for him, not just as a worker but as a leader. It wasn't about a promotion as a reward for working harder or sacrificing more. It was about the growth that came from stepping away, learning, and coming back with a newfound sense of purpose and clarity. Looking forward, he knew that the real test would be how he handled this next chapter. But one thing was certain. The journey had been worth it. He had learned that sometimes you have to step away from everything to truly understand what it all means, and when you return, you come back as someone new, someone ready to embrace success in a way that's more fulfilling and more meaningful than anything you ever expected. So what's the real lesson here? It's easy to look at his story and focus on the success, the promotion, and the happy ending. But if you dig a little deeper, the real value lies not in the outcome, but in the journey that involved stepping back, letting go, and most importantly, learning to trust the process. It's about understanding that sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to be willing to take a step back. And that lesson, the one about the power of pause and reflection, is something that we can all take to heart. In the hustle and bustle of everyday life, especially in the world we live in today, we are often taught to constantly strive, to keep pushing, to never slow down. Society tells us that success is directly linked to how much we work, how much we sacrifice, how many hours we put in. But what if the real key to success isn't just about grinding harder? What if it's about stepping away when things get too overwhelming, taking a moment to breathe, and giving yourself the space to reevaluate everything? Think about it for a second. We all get caught up in the pressure to keep moving forward, to climb higher, to be more, do more, achieve more. But sometimes in the pursuit of more, we lose track of what truly matters. We lose sight of the reasons we started in the first place. We forget what it feels like to simply live, to experience joy, to connect with others, to feel fulfilled in a way that has nothing to do with titles or external recognition. The man in this story learned that the hard way. He was caught in the rat race, driven by the belief that success was measured by how much he could accomplish. He thought that if he just kept pushing, kept climbing, he'd eventually reach the top, and everything would fall into place. But in reality, the more he chased that elusive idea of success, the more disconnected he became from his own life. It wasn't until he made the bold decision to step away that he was able to truly see the bigger picture. When he took time away from work, he wasn't just taking a break from his job, he was taking a break from the expectations and pressures that had been defining him for so long. He was giving himself permission to stop measuring his worth by the number of hours he worked or the number of achievements he could list. He was allowing himself to breathe, to live without the constant need for validation, and in doing so, he started to reconnect with himself in ways he hadn't in years. This, my friends, is where the real lesson lies. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to slow down. Sometimes you need to step away from everything, even if it's just for a little while, to gain the perspective and clarity you need to make better decisions. By letting go of the need to constantly push, constantly strive, you give yourself the freedom to reflect, to rest, and ultimately, to grow in a way that's more sustainable and more aligned with your true self. What does that mean for you? Maybe you've been feeling the pressure of constantly moving forward, pushing through one task after another, checking off boxes, and never really feeling like you're making the progress you want. Perhaps you've been chasing after a goal, convinced that success will solve all your problems, only to find that you're still feeling empty or disconnected. Or maybe you're simply exhausted, burned out from all the stress and the grind, not sure how to find your way back to the life you once loved. If that sounds familiar, it might be time to take a step back, just like he did. It's not about giving up, it's about gaining perspective. It's about recognizing that you don't have to be constantly moving to be making progress. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is to pause, reflect, and allow yourself the space to recharge. The lessons he learned can apply to all of us, no matter where we are in our careers or personal lives. Taking time to reflect isn't just for people who are struggling or burned out, it's for everyone. It's a way of checking in with yourself to ensure that you're on the right path, that your decisions align with your values, and that you're not simply going through the motions because you feel like you should. One of the most important things he learned during his time away was how to define success on his own terms. For so long, he had defined success by external factors, by promotions, by the praise of others, by the job title on his resume. But after stepping away, he realized that true success wasn't about what others thought of him or what he had achieved. It was about how he felt about his life. It was about feeling fulfilled, happy, and balanced, regardless of the accolades or the status. That's something many of us struggle with. We get so caught up in the expectations of others, in the pursuit of external validation, that we forget to stop and ask ourselves, what do I truly want? What does success look like for me? It's easy to get lost in the noise of the world, to think that the only way to achieve success is to follow a prescribed path, to keep moving, keep pushing, keep achieving. But in reality, success is deeply personal, and it looks different for everyone. For some, it might mean climbing the corporate ladder and earning recognition. For others, it'd mean finding balance and taking time to enjoy the small moments in life. The key is to define success for yourself, based on what makes you feel truly fulfilled, not based on what society or others expect of you. Another crucial lesson he learned was the importance of self-care. It's easy to overlook when you're caught up in the daily grind, but without taking care of yourself physically, mentally, and emotionally, it's impossible to perform at your best, whether in your career or your personal life. During his time off, he started to prioritize his well-being in ways he never had before. He focused on sleep, exercise, and healthy eating. He made time for hobbies and activities that brought him joy, and he found that by nurturing his own health, he was able to be more present, more effective, and more creative in all aspects of his life. If there's one thing to take away from his journey, it's this: you don't have to sacrifice your well-being for success. True success is about balance, about taking care of yourself while also achieving your goals. And if that means stepping away for a little while to recharge, then so be it. Sometimes, taking a break is the most powerful thing you can do for your future. In the end, the man's story is a reminder that success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about how you feel along the way. It's about learning to let go of the constant pressure to perform, to chase external validation, and to truly connect with what matters most to you. And by taking that step back, he learned that the road to success is not always a straight line. Sometimes it's a winding path, one that requires reflection, rest, and self-discovery. So take a moment to ask yourself, what does success mean to me? Am I truly aligned with my own values? Am I taking care of myself? The answers to those questions may just lead you to the kind of success you've been searching for all along. As we reach the end of this story, it's clear that the real question isn't about whether the promotion was the reward for hard work or the result of timing. It's about the bigger, more important question. What did the sacrifice really unlock? And more importantly, can we in our own lives use this kind of sacrifice to achieve something greater, to find the kind of success that truly matters? We followed the journey of someone who at one point felt trapped in the unrelenting grind of his career. The weight of constant deadlines, expectations, and the need to be more every single day was taking its toll. But by making the bold decision to step away, to let go of everything that had once defined him, he began to uncover a whole new world, one that wasn't about pushing harder, striving further, or constantly proving his worth. It was about reconnecting with himself, rediscovering his passions, and ultimately finding a deeper sense of fulfillment in every aspect of his life. But it wasn't just the time away that made the difference. It was the lessons he learned during that time. He realized that in order to move forward, sometimes you have to slow down. In order to grow, sometimes you need to step back and let go. In order to succeed, you have to redefine what success means to you and stop measuring it against the standards set by society, your job, or others' expectations. For him, that meant giving himself the time and space to heal, reflect, and ultimately grow in ways he hadn't even known he needed. But was it the sacrifice itself that truly made the difference? Or was it the personal growth, the clarity, and the space for reflection that followed? Was it the act of letting go that set him up for success? Or was it the transformation he underwent during that time? The truth is, it was both, and that's the real power of sacrifice. What the man in this story discovered was that sacrifice isn't always a loss. In fact, the right kind of sacrifice, the kind that allows you to step back, to reevaluate, and to prioritize what really matters, is often the very thing that propels you forward. Sacrificing the need to constantly chase after external success gave him the clarity to understand that true success isn't about accolades, job titles, or what other people think of you. It's about your own well-being, your relationships, and the kind of life you want to create for yourself. The key takeaway here is that sometimes the things we believe we can't live without, the things we're convinced we must hold on to at all costs, are the very things that may be holding us back. By sacrificing the constant need to prove ourselves, the pressure to always be on, and the idea that success is only measured by external achievements, we open ourselves up to a whole new definition of success. One that's about living in alignment with our values, one that prioritizes our mental and emotional health, and one that recognizes that balance is the true measure of a fulfilling life. So what can you take away from this story? What does it mean for you? The first step is to consider what you might be holding on to that's actually preventing you from growing. It could be a job that's no longer fulfilling, a relationship that's draining you, or an identity that's too closely tied to external success. What might happen if you let go of those things, even for just a while, and gave yourself the chance to breathe? What might you discover about yourself in the process? In our culture, we're often told that success is about how much we achieve, how much we produce, and how quickly we climb the ladder. But as we've seen in this story, success can look very different when we stop measuring it by those standards. Success can be about reconnecting with your passions, rebuilding your relationships, or simply finding peace with where you are in life. It's not always about getting ahead. It's about getting aligned. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what would happen if I stopped chasing success the way I've always been told to? What if I let go of the things that no longer serve me, the things that I'm holding on to out of fear or obligation, and made space for something new? What would success look like if I started measuring it by my own standards, instead of those of others? This isn't just about career or achievement. It's about life as a whole. It's about understanding that your worth isn't tied to your job, your title, or your productivity. Your worth comes from who you are, how you live, and how you show up for the people and things that matter most to you. True success comes from finding balance, from nurturing your relationships, from taking care of your mental and physical health, and from pursuing the things that truly light you up. And sometimes to get to that place, you need to make the difficult decision to step away from everything that's keeping you stuck. In the end, the man's promotion wasn't the real success story, it was his transformation. The real success came from understanding that sometimes you have to give up what seems like the most important thing in order to discover what truly matters. It's about letting go of the belief that success is something that can only be earned through hard work and sacrifice. It's about realizing that the greatest success is living a life that feels true to you, one where you're at peace with yourself, your choices, and the path you're on. And that's something we can all learn from. Whether you're in a job that no longer serves you, feeling burnt out from the constant pressure to perform, or simply wondering what your next step should be, know that sometimes, taking a step back is exactly what you need. Sometimes, the greatest leap forward comes from a period of pause. So, I ask you, what could you gain from making the sacrifice to step back and reflect on your life? What might you discover about yourself, about what truly matters, and about the kind of life you want to create? Sometimes, the most difficult decisions lead to the most transformative experiences. And in the end, those experiences can unlock the kind of success that no title, no job, no external recognition ever could. Because true success, as we've learned, isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become in the process.